Good evening and welcome to Quorum. I'm Wilson Stribling. We have less than 2 weeks left in the 2011 regular session of the legislature. That means some of the most vital issues at the Capitol are coming to a head right now. House and Senate negotiators are meeting with each other and with Governor Haley Barbour, trying to determine the final shape of the new state budget. Agencies and programs across the state are waiting to learn how badly their budgets will be cut. Tonight, we'll examine how the rough economy and budgets have impacted higher education in Mississippi. We'll begin with the latest efforts of budget writers as they chip away at their differences on key state appropriations.
House negotiators held a budget briefing Tuesday. They objected to Governor Haley Barbour's statement Monday evening on the unfolding budget proposal. Barbour says lawmakers' plan spends too much of the state's reserve funds. House Democrats deny that, and they say the governor's objection interferes with budget negotiations.
We may compromise some, but we've already compromised with the Senate. And now he comes in, he wants us to compromise with him.
Senate Appropriations Chairman Doug Davis says he's confident that negotiators can reach agreement on a 2012 budget and do so on time. But he wouldn't go into detail Tuesday on specific agency funding levels.
When I say total education and health care, I mean we have yet to come to agreements on K-12, community college, and higher education. We have yet to come to agreements on Medicaid, mental health. The health care, any agency that was predominantly health care related, there's still up for discussion.
The institutions of higher learning are requesting $746 million in state support for fiscal 2012, about $30 million more than last year. Mississippi's 8 public universities are serving more than 87,000 students. That's an increase of 11,000 from 11 years ago.
We do think that we're going to be up significantly again. Some places larger than others. I mean, we think we're going to see fairly sizable increases at Mississippi State and University of Mississippi. We think we'll see increases at University of Southern Mississippi, but the others, we're still waiting on numbers to come in, and we really won't know what those numbers look like for another couple of months.
The state's 15 community and junior colleges are serving another 88,000 students, a 7% increase from fall 2009. Hines Community College in central Mississippi is among many schools that have expanded facilities to cope with the additional students. But those expansions come with price tags. And community colleges worry that their funding needs will be overshadowed by K-12 and university budget demands. An early session appropriations bill would have kept state support for community colleges level at $226 million. But the governor vetoed that on March 3rd. He said it was too early to appropriate the money without having an overall budget agreement.
The last budget for fiscal year 2011 made substantial cuts in state funding for universities and community colleges. Students are already seeing the impact of those cuts. They're paying higher tuition and more for room and board as a result of dwindling state support. We're going to discuss higher education this evening with four lawmakers, that is, directly involved in overseeing its development in Mississippi. We're pleased to have Senator Tollison with us tonight. He is a Democrat representing voters in Yalobusha, Tallahatchie, and Lafayette counties. He serves on the Senate Universities and Colleges Committee. Senator Briggs Hopson is also on the University and Colleges Committee. He's a Republican from Issaquena, Warren, and Yazoo counties. From the House, Representative Kelvin Buck chairs the Chamber's Universities Committee. He is a Democrat representing Benton and Marshall counties. And Representative Toby Barker is here. The Republican from Forest and Lamar counties is vice chairman of the House Universities and Colleges Committee. Gentlemen, we welcome you all to Quorum. Of course, we want you to join this conversation as well. If you have a question on higher education affairs or any other key issues at the state capitol, dial this toll-free number. It's 1-877-405-5247. We'll flash that number on your screen periodically throughout the program. You can also email your questions to quorum@mpbonline.org. You can join the discussion on Twitter as well. Just add the hashtag Quorum to your comment and follow us at twitter.com/MPBOnline. So, gentlemen, let's start off with a key question or a key issue, the latest on education appropriations. The lead House and Senate negotiators met just this afternoon with Governor Barbour. They say the governor wants an additional $77 million cut from the $5.5 billion budget. House Appropriations Chairman Johnny Stringer said Barbour wants the money cut from mental health and education funding. That includes K-12, community colleges, and universities. But Senate Appropriations Chairman Doug Davis said the governor did not specify where the cuts should be made. So, Senator Tollison, let me ask you the first question this evening. What's your reaction to that report?
Well, I think, we've still got a week left in the session, and we've got to get down into the details in terms of where the money's coming from and where to spend it. My position is I do want some more money for our education, and hopefully we can get some specifically for K through 12, but also try to help the community colleges and universities. I understand we have a tight budget, and we've got to find the money first, and I recognize that, but we're working hard to do that. And that's a problem with the redistricting. That's kind of diverted our attention, and I wish we had put that to rest so we can focus on the budget, because it is a tough situation. But we're all working together and talking to each other, and that's important. And at some point we will have to reach a consensus and get an agreement, and hopefully we'll get it before April 1st or April 2nd on sine die.
Senator Hopson, your thoughts on these potential additional cuts and how they'll affect education?
Well, the fact is I didn't know what the governor had proposed until right when I walked in here tonight. I've been tied up in public health conferences today. In fact, Representative Barker and I were tied up for a few hours on a public health bill that we're working on. So I'm just hearing about this. Obviously, we would all like to be able to give education as much money as possible, but we know that we've got to live within the constraints of the budget, and we've got to try to make these tough decisions. Like Senator Tollison said, the next week and a half will be the time that we start hashing out where the money's going to go and what's available to be spent this year.
Chairman Buck, your reaction to the developments today?
Well, it's my view that this process always ends up at this point, about this point in the session, where we really don't know exactly what the bottom line numbers will be. And at the end of the day, the numbers will reflect two things. They'll reflect how much money we have to spend, and then they'll reflect the priorities. And I guess that's where I think the differences always come up in terms of how we appropriate these dollars, and that is what we consider as priorities, because really you have to make a decision in this process how important it is to fund and these different programs, these different agencies, and make a determination as to how much you really want to invest in education, and which is perhaps, without question, the largest part of that budget. Last year was about 58% of our overall general fund budget. This time we hope it'll be, and that was the first time in some years that it dropped that low as it was about 58%. Usually it's around 62% of that general fund budget. So, there's a pie, and we'll have to determine how the different parts of the pie are divided. And I hope that we will, if we're going to err on the side of education.
Representative Barker, your thoughts on these additional cuts?
I think the thing we all want in this process is for us to finish on time. We don't need to go into extended session. We don't need to go into special session this year to figure out the budget. I think we know what revenues we're going to have, and while we're seeing some growth in our economy, that growth is very microscopic right now. And so far in the 8 months in this fiscal year, we've met projection 6 of those months. In fact, in February we fell below our projection by $5 million, and so we have to keep that in mind. We don't need to spend too much of our reserves in this next fiscal year, but by far this is going to be the toughest one, because we started down by losing all of our stimulus money, and so we're having to sort of cut everyone and sort of try to brace them for this, which will be the worst of the fiscal years in this recession, I think.
Let me back up a little bit and just get your general impressions of the state of higher education in Mississippi. Mr. Buck, your thoughts on how our colleges and universities in Mississippi are faring in general at this point.
Well, the first thing I would say is that we have some very capable leadership at the institutions of higher learning and the community college level. I think that with the resources that they have, they're doing an outstanding job. They have been facing cuts over the last 2 or 3 years, and they've been able to maintain the quality of education. With that said, the question becomes, how long can they continue to deal with these cuts and still maintain that quality education and maintain the accessibility that we're all looking for as it relates to our residents having accessibility to a higher education? And so the big question for those of us who are responsible for appropriating dollars is to make sure that in our attempts to try to balance a budget and cut the budget and stay within our means, we don't do so much damage that long term our institutions of higher learning suffer. And so I think they're doing well with what they have, but I don't know how much more they can take. We are now at a point where the general fund dollars that we appropriate are no longer above what the tuition and other dollars that students are putting in themselves and families are putting in themselves. And that's a trend that we really need to be concerned about. And if that's the trend that we're going to continue to go on, you know, we need to understand the implications of those trends.
Senator Hopson, your thoughts on the state of higher education in Mississippi?
I think it's good. It could be better. And one of the things that could help it be better is obviously if you can infuse more cash into it. But again, with the budget constraints that we have, that's not always possible. One thing that I'm very, very pleased about in higher education, and as Representative Buck said, we have unfortunately had to cut budgets in higher education over the last few years, but they have taken a very proactive approach. The IHL has been very, very good about going back and consolidating services where they could. What we call backroom operations. They've taken some of those backroom operations within the university system and combined those in a way that we can maximize the dollars that we put into the education process. So, you know, I'm very pleased with what they've done, because a lot of agencies have sat around and whined and moaned as budgets have been cut, and unfortunately that's a result of a tough economy. They've been good about going, you know, taking the reins and trying to make something good out of it, and I'm very satisfied with the way they've handled that situation.
Governor Barbour has called for a greater focus on career technical training at community colleges. Do you think, Representative Barker, do you think that the two-year colleges are responding well to that demand for more technical training, and do you think it's necessary? Absolutely.
We're seeing record enrollment in our community and junior colleges. I think last count in the fall we had over 88,000 Mississippians enrolled at our 15 community and junior colleges, from everything from academic to vocational and technical and career training. That's going to be a bigger focus as we go forward in the global economy. They've done a great job in trying to weather the storm. The mid-level funding that law that we passed in 2007, I don't think anyone foresaw the recession to come, and so they've had to weather the state not picking up its obligation on that. But as we go forward and as we need more career-minded training, and especially in this Education Achievement Council, as we try to prepare Mississippians for the jobs of not only today but tomorrow, it's going to play a bigger and bigger role.
Senator Tollison, excuse me.
Well, one thing I wanted to add about the state of IHL is the good thing we've got going for our universities is affordability, and especially in this environment. When you look at private universities, that's $50,000 a year for 1 year of school. And ours are very affordable. I mean, it's $13,000 to $10,000 a year, and you get a good quality education there. And I think that's helping our universities. A lot of students who otherwise might go away to school or to a private school are staying home. And we've seen an increase over the past 10 years of 10 or 11,000 students at IHL. So I think that's a good thing. But I think the community colleges, their role is career technical training. A 2 years associate degree in welding or something like that can get you a job of $70,000 a year, and they're out there, and they do a good job of looking at what jobs are available in the Mississippi area and creating programs and a curriculum to train those students for those jobs. I mean, they've got a lot of career opportunities out there from Northeast all the way to the Gulf Coast community colleges, and that should be their focus, and I think it is. I know a lot of students do use the community colleges for affordability and convenience of being near home and go to the first 2 years of school at the community college, then transferring into a 4-year university, which is fine. But the primary focus should be that career technical training.
Well, you make a good point on cost, but we can clearly see that the costs for higher education are hitting some students where it hurts. The State College Board ordered multi-year tuition hikes last year following substantial budget cuts. Students at the state's 8 public universities will pay an average 6.8% more this fall than they did last year. And just last week, the College Board approved an average 5.1% increase for campus housing and a similar increase for meal plans. University officials say they're trying to offset rising costs. They've been coping with a number of state budget cuts over the last few years. So, Senator Tollison, with these latest increases, do you think higher education, despite what you said a moment ago about it being affordable as compared to private institutions, but are we pricing it out of reach of some young Mississippians?
It is going up. I don't like that, but it's still affordable compared to other universities, especially with the private schools. And I think probably if you compare it to other state universities in our area, unfortunately, if you look in 1998, 54% of the revenues for IHL came from appropriations and only 33% from tuition. 2011, 54% comes from tuition and 40% comes from appropriations. It's definitely as a result of budget cuts over the past several years that that's occurred. The IHL, the colleges can go to the tuition to raise that. And I hate to see that happening because it does raise the cost of it, and it may price people out of going to it. And I hope, with financial aid and Pell Grants and things of that nature, they can do it. And it's a matter of the legislature deciding if they want to offset that tuition. But again, all that said, it's still an affordable, good quality education you can get in our university system.
Representative Buck, do you think students in Mississippi have adequate options for financial aid, and do you think the economy has an effect on that?
Well, I think it clearly has an effect on it, but I wanted to point out a couple of things that you just mentioned. You asked a very good question as it relates to bringing up the points about what these additional costs are when it comes to tuition, housing, and all these things. In other words, the cost of education is not going down, it's continuing to go up. The question becomes, how is that cost going to be absorbed? Who's going to pay for that cost, and what role will the state play? I think there's a clear pattern, and I think by design, in some people's view, that we probably should have people paying more for college. I tend to be a little concerned about that added cost. But when it comes to things like Pell Grant and MTAG and some of these other programs in which we provide some financial assistance, some of it is needs-based, some of it is a performance-based kind of grants and things for students, then I think we still have enough about that out there to really help those students that would really have a problem going to college. I think we have enough programs out there that are really helping them make that ends meet, so to speak, in that regard. But we're treading on some very serious territory here in philosophy as it relates to public education, period. Whether it be K-12, community colleges, or our institutions of higher learning, the trend is still, in my view, trending away from the public support of these institutions to more of a privatization approach. And I have some very serious concerns about that, even though the affordability, as Senator Tollison has mentioned, is still there.
Interesting. Well, we mentioned in our setup report that community colleges fear being overshadowed by university and K-12 funding requests. Senator Hopson, how critical do you think it is to maintain the mid-level funding for the two-year schools?
It's important, and obviously now, because of the increase in enrollment, that we maintain funding appropriately for community colleges. One thing that I'm very pleased about with our community colleges and our K-12 in the last year is that they've agreed to work together to do what I call dual-track enrollment, and that is to allow students that don't desire to go to a four-year college to actually start in high school, to work towards a career or vocation in high school and get some training with administration from the community colleges that I think will serve our community colleges and our K-12 and our society in general, because we want these students getting out with a skill, whether it's coming out of high school with a skill or it's coming out of community college, that they can turn into a good job and they can be a productive citizen here in Mississippi. So yes, it's important, and as enrollment increases, it's important to keep them funded. I'm repeating myself again, but we all have to live within those budget constraints that we have, and there aren't unlimited funds for us to use for every level of education or every department in the state. So it's a difficult balance.
Let me add something about the issue of going to college and affordability. There's some small things that are taking place. One, in a lot of schools, more AP classes are being offered, advanced placement in high school, so that they can get college credit when they're in high school. So that's less credit you have to pay for when you're in college. I mean, some people can have their 24 hours of credit and skip their freshman year, I mean, if you're performing well. And additionally, something that Tupelo is looking at is guaranteed tuition. They will pay for you to go to college if you perform well at their high school. They're not doing it yet, but they're looking at it. Some communities across the country are looking at this. I know that we do it in Northeast Mississippi and areas for community colleges. You guarantee tuition to students in the county that want to go to community college if they have a certain grade level. So I think these things are happening, small little areas to help students who want to go to college attain that. So,
and the fact remains that 9 out of the last 10 years, tuition has increased, and that when I started college back in 2000, tuition was a lot less than it is now. We've seen incremental increases since then, and so you're at a point where enrollment is still increasing, but so is tuition, and so. But eventually, you're going to hit a price point when it no longer becomes affordable, and tuition raised to such a point will begin to limit access. But we're seeing a fundamental shift, as Chairman Buck mentioned, in how higher education is funded. Instead of the majority in appropriation, it's now the majority in tuition. And going forward in the long term, we're going to have to think about, are we going to eventually start limiting access as tuition increases on Mississippi families? 80% of our students right now are on some kind of assistance, whether that be Pell Grant or scholarship. But you also have to start concerning yourselves with, can a student's debt load and the debt they're taking on as they go through college and grad school and trying to tool themselves for a global economy, will they be able to handle that long term?
Well, performance-based budgeting may become a much bigger factor for the state's universities and colleges. The governor has signed a bill directing the Education Achievement Council to develop a funding mechanism for the schools based on productivity. Mr. Barber promoted such an effort in his executive budget recommendation. The governor wrote, "Currently, we pay based upon enrollment, but do not hold them accountable for the results accomplished by those exiting the system. Data show we have a completion problem, not an enrollment problem." Now, the Education Achievement Council has until November 2012 to submit a report on such a funding device. So Representative Buck was the primary author of that bill. So how do you believe such a productivity-based budget system would work, sir?
Well, I supported the bill from this standpoint, and that is that, I think we have to put everything on the table when it comes to funding and what we're going to use as part of the formula for determining how much funding should be allocated. But you have to be, again, very careful about the kind of weight you would place on things like performance. I talked with several of the institutions' presidents, especially at the community college level. I'll be serving as a co-chair of this Achievement Council, and so I'll be very careful to take in consideration what they say and some of the things that they think we need to consider when we talk about the performance. Performance is impacted in a lot of ways. What does an institution receive as it relates to students who come into the institution has a lot to do with how well those students will perform at that collegiate level. So there are a lot of things to take in consideration. Any formula that would place too much weight on performance is a formula that might not be the right approach to take, and so we have to take all those things into consideration.
And you were a co-author of that bill as well. What appeals to you about that kind of system?
Well, long term, it's a conversation we have to have, and when we started this university system and continue to grow it, in the economy we're in today, we've had to ask ourselves some very difficult questions. One, can we support 8 public institutions of higher learning? And that's a conversation that I think we hope to be able to continue to support that. But also, since fiscal year 09, higher ed's been cut $51 million. 40% of those costs have been absorbed through tuition increases. A third of those costs have had to come through efficiencies and back office operation, energy efficiencies, and then finally the rest of it is made up through program cuts. And I know at Southern Miss, our president, Dr. Martha Saunders, was very proactive in trying to get a campus group together to take ownership over it and figure out what programs does that institution do well and what does it not need to be in the business of anymore. And I think that if we're going to have 8 institutions, there has to be some delineations and roles. And what are our goals? What are the needs of our workforce for the next 20 and 30 and 50 years? I know this Education Achievement Council, when in its initial recommendations in 2009, set out that we were going to increase our graduation rates to the national average, which would make us hopefully have to graduate another 150,000 people by the year 2025. That's a very good goal, but it also means we're going to have to plan and what programs we continue at certain institutions. Part of what we've seen in other states, Arkansas and California, have completed what are called covenants between their legislative body and their institutions that they say, all right, if you appropriate us this amount of money, we're going to meet these benchmarks going forward. And hopefully this Education Achievement Council will present some recommendations that will lead Mississippi to do the same thing. So.
Senator Tollison, you see any drawbacks to a system like this, productivity-based budgeting?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it would help. And there is a problem with incoming classes dropping out, I think, after the freshman and sophomore year. And I know that's something that the University of Mississippi is working on, and I'm sure the other colleges are as well. But we like to see people finish that four-year degree. But oftentimes you see that there's a significant drop-off after the first and second years of their four-year career. So I think if we work in terms of increasing graduation rates, you'll see a result in our increase in personal income. I mean, it's a given that a person who has a college degree makes twice as much or more than someone with just a high school degree. And I mean, that's a proven fact. So the more college graduates we have, I think it helps Mississippi's economy.
Senator Hopson, your thoughts on productivity-based budgeting?
I think I agree with my colleagues here and the governor. I think we're all saying the same thing. You do have to take into account some performance measures that are based on the certain factors that may not be as easy as saying, is this person graduating, and count them as a number, yay or nay. I think there's some things you have to look at, but if we can set the right parameters that are fair and reasonable, then I have no problem. In fact, I would be in favor of performance-based measures.
Another recommendation for the governor was to cut state funding for community college athletics programs. How did that proposal fare at the legislature, Representative Buck, and was it ever carried into legislation?
No. The short answer to that is no. The institutions, part of any institution is certainly some of the other activities other than academic that they offer for students. And of course, that whole college experience of sports and athletics and some other areas where students get involved is really important. Really, we are in some extraordinary shortfall budget times. That goes without saying. But we can't, and I've cautioned on this before, make long-term education policies based on these kind of extraordinary times, because we won't be here all the time. There will be a time when we are more productive, our economy will bounce back, and things will get a little bit better. It may not be as fast as many of us would like, but when we make education policy ought to be based on some long-term objectives, some long-term goals, and certainly not on budgets that are really below what we would normally expect when it comes to growth. And so with that said, the Achievement Council has come out with some recommendations. The Achievement Council is looking at all of the different ways to make things more efficient. But at the end of the day, the residents of Mississippi are competing nationally and internationally as it relates to for jobs and all of these other kinds of things. And to have them prepared and be able to compete, and as many of our people are able to compete, is a positive approach to education. And so our policy ought to reflect that long-term interest and that long-term goal.
All right, you are watching Quorum on MPB Television and mpbonline.org. We hope you'll call in with your questions. The toll-free number is 1-877-405-5247. You can also email us at quorum@mpbonline.org or follow us on Twitter. And if you're an educator, look for the Quorum page on our website, mpbonline.org. We have an education resource and activity guide there for your classroom use. And we'll continue our discussion now. I want to stay with you for a moment, Representative Buck. There's a bond bill under House and Senate negotiation. It would funnel up to $325 million to community colleges, universities, and other agencies to fund repairs, renovations, other projects. How critical is that money to those schools?
These schools, they work hard to try to come up with a plan to present to the Ways and Means Committee as it relates to the House, and I think it's the Finance Committee over in the Senate, to try to determine what their capital improvement needs are, what some of their R&R needs are, and they work hand in hand with their leadership when it comes to the institutions of higher learning to determine what those priorities should be. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, when it comes to our community colleges, their request is not near what the real needs are. I mean, we've had the opportunity to tour some of these campuses, and they're dealing with leaking roofs and deteriorating buildings. And these buildings are not going to be any cheaper to repair and restore as we go down the road. And so many of the things that they are dealing with are infrastructural kind of things like gas and water and things of this nature that have to be addressed. And so this money, bond money, will be crucial to them. And of course, it doesn't come lightheartedly. They put a lot of work into preparing what should be priorities and staying within, you know, some of the constraints that we have when it comes to the budget. And so we hope that we'll be able to reach the goal that we have for them and provide them with those dollars that will be very important when it comes to them maintaining their campuses and keeping them safe, keeping them where they can aesthetically be nice campuses where students will enjoy the environment for learning.
Senator Hopson, your thoughts on this $325 million bond bill?
Well, the bond bill has been one of my big frustrations since I've been here in the Senate, and our bond bills typically start out every year with appropriations for our universities and community colleges in some case. That part of the bond bill I favor, but what happens, unfortunately, in the finance committees and ways and means committees, and then on the floor of the two chambers, is a lot of times you have all these add-ons, and everybody's got special projects or pet projects they put into the bond bill. And it gets to a point where what was intended to be maybe a $100 million bond bill turns into a $350 million bond bill. And I just can't support a bond bill. That's basically, in my opinion, taking out the credit card of the state and putting it on the table and saying we're gonna pay all this money over 20 or 30 years with interest. And the universities and colleges part, I couldn't agree more. I think we do have some buildings that need repair, and I think the bond bill is a good way to go on repairing the infrastructure needs that we have at our universities and colleges. But I get sick and tired of the pet projects, and I just get to a point where I just, you know, it's a frustration. I voted against it this year again because of all the pet projects that are added into the bond bill. Now, we've been told it'll go to conference and a lot of that will get cut out and things will change, but we have a hard time when you don't know what it is and people are adding stuff in. I just refuse to, and although I know it would hurt the universities and colleges not to pass some kind of bond bill to help them, we've got to draw the line somewhere and say, all right, we're going to do bond bills for specific needs of state agencies instead of the pet projects, as I call them.
And that's what you'd support if it were strictly for the original intention?
With reasonable dollars, and it was for things like universities and colleges, absolutely, I'd be supportive of that.
We have a caller with a question now. Paul from Picayune. You're on the air now with your question, please, sir.
Evening. Gentlemen, I'm in a unique situation. My wife, she's a student at William Carey. She went for education, but after everything went down with Governor Barber, she was blessed to switch to business. And my question is, I want to know what the next governor legislator, because I know it's probably not going to happen now, but what the next governor legislator is going to do and get together and hunker down and really try to fix this problem. We know what the problem has been for years, but I'm very interested in seeing some change, some real reform.
I believe I misunderstood, sir. You said your wife was at William Carey and she switched to what? I'm sorry, he's off. Anyone want to address that? I didn't quite get the full question, though. His wife was a student at William Carey.
Well, you know, I don't know what the particular problem is. It seemed as though he was talking about the accessibility issue, but I really couldn't respond to the question because I'm not real clear about exactly what the issue was. But perhaps he could call back or something.
Well, we'll move on and talk about the fact that higher education is increasingly important to the fate of our economy, but Mississippians are having trouble making the grade. The latest figures from the U.S. Census indicate almost 73% of Mississippians 25 years old or older have a high school diploma, but less than 17% have a bachelor's or higher degree from a college or university. That compares with the national average of 24%. So, Representative Barker, do you think these numbers hinder the state in terms of luring new businesses to Mississippi?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the thing that businesses look for the most in economic development is an educated workforce. And while I don't think necessarily a four-year degree is a mandate, is a mandatory thing for every citizen, I do think it's important. If you look at the recession, the unemployment rate was cut in half for those people who had college degrees. Only half of them were unemployed. And so going forward in a global economy where we're not just competing against the next town or the next state, we're competing for jobs with places like China, we have to tool our workforce to be able to handle that kind of responsibility and handle that kind of challenge. And it's not going to be a race just to recruit the next business. We're going to have to be innovative. Our institutions for higher learning play a key role in trying to spin off new businesses. We have to have a multifaceted economic development strategy from recruitment to retention to entrepreneurship. And in our institutions of higher learning, one of the great value adds for them is the research they conduct often turns into new businesses. And we see that at Southern Miss with our new innovation park. I know that Ole Miss and State also have research that turns into real jobs for people, and so that's the kind of focus that we need to. And talking about the performance-based, there's an economic development component to all of our institutions, and so. But yes, it's important that we continue to train and try to build our arsenal of educated workforce, and so.
Senator Tollison, do you think this low educational attainment hurts us on the national stage?
Well, I think it's important if you want to bring jobs to Mississippi, and I think you're starting to see that. I mean, one of the things Toyota located up there is because of it saw the educational attainment in that area. I mean, you got great schools in that area, and you've got the University of Mississippi right nearby, and they're building the Center for Manufacturing Excellence at Ole Miss, which will partner with Toyota. But as Toby said, you look at Lafayette County, Oktibbeha, Forest, and some of those areas, the college education is 24–25%. I think that makes a difference. We're creating these education clusters, and jobs are moving in there. You see the growth in Forest County and Lafayette County. Lafayette County had a 22% growth, and it's going to continue. And the university is an economic development engine that we need to continue to take advantage of. We were talking about research. We have companies in Oxford and in Starkville, Mississippi State. Jackson State's got some startup companies. I've got a proposal to put some money to help seed these small companies through the MURA, it's called Mississippi University's Research Authority, to help these companies start out, and hopefully they'll go out on their own and create jobs, Mississippi jobs right here. There's a company in Oxford called FNC that started. They have 150 employees. They started at the University of Mississippi. The Polymer Institute has created companies there. Mississippi State has a company called Semi-South. We have to have homegrown businesses, and that will help generate jobs right here in Mississippi. I mean, it's good to have the Toyotas and the Nissans, but we need to take advantage of our universities across the state, and they do partner with our existing industries, and then that helps. I mean, and we'll continue to do that.
We're going to try the phone lines again. We have a caller now on the line, Bryce, calling from Leake County. Bryce, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask the question. I taught for 25 years, and when I came in, we was 50th on everything. I mean, at high school education. When I left, we 49th or 50th on everything. So are these guys going to, when is someone's going to step up and say, are we going to get a long-term plan to come off the bottom? Thank you.
We hear about the fact that we're at the bottom of every list, especially when it comes to education. This gentleman's been teaching for 2 decades, and we're still there and we were when he started. What can be done? What basic steps can be taken to change that?
Well, I'll fire first. One thing I mentioned earlier is dual track enrollment, and that's going to allow students not to be dropouts because they can get vocational or career training. And they can go to work, and then those students that aspire to go on to whether it be community college as they continue on to get to 4-year degree, that's going to help improve our education, overall education. The worst thing we can do in education is to have students dropping out. And that sends your numbers, the percentages that you showed on the screen a few minutes ago. That's a surefire way to increase that percentage, is have them drop out. And trying to engage these kids at an early age and get them involved in understanding how important education is for them. We've got some other things that I think are done on the local level. We have home rule in our school districts, so we allow them some flexibility in how they can handle their own schools. And you see some schools doing better than others, and I think what we've got to do is find a way to get those school districts and challenge them to adopt or meet some of the same standards that some of the more successful school districts in our state are meeting, and then we're going to see a better product, a better student coming out of our school system.
Let me just add to that. The gentleman makes a very good point, and all of us have heard this for years and years, and again, he's right in that this has been continuing for years and years. But I think one area where we really could make an impact, it's a long-term approach, but I think it's very important, and that's early childhood education. I think an investment in earlier in childhood education would benefit us greatly. All the research and study shows that once a student gets off to a great start like that at the early ages of their life, then they do well throughout the process. And it's a long-term approach, but it is one approach that we think with the right kind of investment, which brings us back to this dollars thing, the funding thing, both the targeted investment in terms of where we put the money and significant investment will help us move past where we are, 50 when it comes to education. And how do we know this works? Because that's what many of the other states that we're competing with are doing. They're investing in education. And the reason we continue to lag, even though we've made some significant progress, I don't think anybody ought to dismiss the progress that we've made in many of our areas. But the reality is that we're competing and everybody else is doing the same thing. They're continuing to invest and they're targeting that investment in areas like early childhood education and certainly working with ways like achievement councils to try to determine what's the best practices for our universities and colleges when it comes to educational attainment. So we have to continue in that trend, and I think we're heading in that right direction.
All right, we have another caller on the line. Aaron calling us from Oxford. Aaron, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, I'm a public school teacher, and as I'm looking at my 10-year plan here, and with such a low teacher pay here in Mississippi, I'm looking at going to law school or going to Texas and places like that where the pay is greater. So when we're talking about investing in education, don't we need to think about attracting the best and brightest people to educate our children here in Mississippi?
Teacher pay, it comes up just about every year. Representative Barker, would you like to take that?
Well, first of all, Aaron, we hope you stay teaching in Mississippi. But it's a subject, and you could use that with any sort of teaching profession, or we need to attract and maintain the highest possible talent when it comes to educating our children. One thing, going back to what Chairman Buck says, we're the only state that does not, only southern state, and one of 6 states nationally that does not have any investment in early childhood education. And while it's certainly something that's not going to be just solely state government, we have to partner with our faith-based groups, we have to partner with nonprofits. The problem is our children are starting off behind. And so when they get to kindergarten and our teachers are trying to catch them up because they've either grown up in generational poverty and they're starting off behind, it puts a real burden on our teachers. In terms of teacher pay, I hope we can get to a point where we pay our teachers for what they're worth, and that's realizing that they are educating the next generation of Mississippi's workforce, and that's certainly one of the most valuable assets that we can have. Right now in this economy, of course, we haven't been able to do as much as we'd like to do in terms of teacher pay, but hopefully when we come out of this and we start to see revenues pick up, that we'll be able to do more for those teachers.
Let's look at education more broadly now. We know Mississippi has a 16.5% dropout rate. The State Board of Education is promoting its goal of cutting the dropout rate to 13% by 2013. So, Senator Hopson, do you think that is a realistic goal?
Well, it's difficult, and I'm glad that we set high and difficult goals because we need to aspire to do the best we can. And as I mentioned earlier, dropouts are a tremendous drain on our economy. So anything we can do to be proactive to address that problem, we need to do it. And I'm pleased that goal was set. I think that was set about 3 years ago under Hank Bound's leadership at the Department of Education. Whether or not it's attainable, I don't know. I haven't looked at the most recent statistics on that, so I can't answer you honestly at this point since we're only 2 years away from that. But I'm sure hopeful that we'll get there.
So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there was an article in the paper today about this, and it was an incredible percentage of, they say how many dropouts you have, I can't remember, 40 to 70% end up in jail. So we're going to be paying $30,000 to house and feed them in the jail. So we've got a choice. We can make sure they graduate and are good, productive citizens, or we'll wait 5 years later and we're going to be paying $30,000 to house them, feed them, give them medical care. And my choice would be to pay $5,000 or $6,000 to educate that child. I think it's important, and where we put the money, we can put it in the classroom with the teacher. There's an experiment up in Brooklyn right now in a charter school. They're paying teachers $100,000 a year, and they're looking to see if that's going to help bring the lower socioeconomic students in the New York area up, and it is. It's working. But they're out thinking outside the box. The teachers are acting as assistant principals. They're doing a lot of things that administration does. But we've got to set these high goals, and we do that, and we make the teachers do everything they can to test the students, and the students are a lot of pressure of taking a lot of different tests. They have to take 4 subject area exams to graduate, and I think that's good. But at the same time, we're tying their hands behind their back when we don't provide the funding through the teachers. They have to increase the classroom size. They don't have the supplies. We've cut classroom supplies by $14 million over the past 5 years. That's not good. I mean, some biology labs in this state don't even have equipment. I mean, how can you, if you don't have a microscope, how can you learn about biology? So, you know, we used to provide about $500. Those things are important, and you know what? Those kids that are going through right now, they don't have that opportunity. They eliminated arts and drama program up in one of my schools. Kid, 8th grade, he's not going to 8th grade again next year. He misses out on that arts and drama. You think it's not a big deal? That's a big part of the education of a student as far as I'm concerned. So we do have to do better. If we're making demands on our teachers and our students across the state, we need to give them the tools to make them be able to pass the subject area exams and to graduate. Because you know what, we're going to pay for it in the end, in the long run.
Representative Buck, your thoughts on this in a couple of years, dropping the dropout rate to 13% from the current 16.5%?
Well, like everything we talk about here tonight relating to education, those goals are fine. But there's a fundamental issue here that we I think are not really addressing, and that is if we're talking about paying our teachers what they're worth, if we're talking about early childhood education investment, if we're talking about reducing the dropout rate, there is something that has to be done, and that is the kind of investment in dollars. The question becomes, does the state collect in revenue enough money to achieve any of these goals of giving our teachers what they deserve, of dealing with early Head Start or childhood education? And the question and the answer to that is, with the current way that we collect, it probably isn't. We won't ever get to any of these goals with the way we deal with our revenue right now. I don't think. I mean, there's only so much that growth will bring to the pot. So the reality is we have to keep trying, keep working at it, but hope is not going to get us there. We really have to make a decision as to how big of a role government is going to play and how much are we willing to sacrifice on the front end so that we won't have to deal with some of these extra costs of supporting people who can't support themselves on the back end. And I think the investment on the front end in some of these educational areas will solve some of our problems long term. That's why we can't have a short-term approach to education. It has to be a long-term approach.
All right, we have an email question now. This is from Chris, and Chris asks, several of you have alluded to programs that may need to be cut. Can you be specific as to what university programs are being considered to be cut?
I don't know specifically, but if there's redundancy in some programs, I mean, in the IHL Board of Commissioners, they look at this all the time to determine if there's only 2 students in a graduate program at one of the universities, they say that should be eliminated. And it actually comes from Jackson at the head of the higher education commissioner as opposed to the university president. I think it's a little less, or the legislature is a little less pressure in that situation. But they're always looking to make sure they have efficiency. And I know also they're increasing efficiencies in terms of energy efficiency across we have 8 campuses, we have satellite campuses, we generate a lot of power. So we're looking at energy efficiencies, ways to efficiencies in textbooks cost, different things like that. If you go to the IHL website, they have a whole program list of things they've looked at to save money. So it's not so much program cuts as to increasing efficiency and saving money. So that's I think, and that goes a long way towards saving money and putting money in the classroom.
I think the thing that happened on the front end of this is that our presidents of our institutions, led by the board of IHL, really took a proactive stance and said, this is what's coming. How do we plan for this? And I know that almost all university presidents gathered these councils on their campuses to see what is it that we do well. In many campuses, they found the vast majority of their students were we're in only a small percentage of the programs. And so those extra programs that people aren't enrolled in, as Gray was saying, that's where you start. And while you don't want to limit yourself in terms of your growth, you need to make sure that each institution knows its own identity and what it does well and what its mission is, and we have some delineation there. And so in terms of which programs are cut first, I think each institution is going to make those calls, of course with the approval of IHL, and so I think we'll end up with, you don't want to end up with 8 mediocre institutions, but I think that what this process has allowed us to do is to really set forth a targeted strategy on how we're going to move forward in the future.
We have a question that someone has posed via Twitter. And the question is, what about a state lottery system benefiting education? Anybody want to go on record saying, I support a lottery to benefit state education? Yes, sir, Mr.
That
Buck.
wasn't my hand raising to say necessarily. But I think we we can look at gimmicks like that. I think lotteries and things of this nature, yes, while some states have used them and have been, they've been helpful with education, to me, it's kind of it's almost a gimmick in terms of how we feel like we ought to fund education. I mean, what are you saying when you say a lottery necessarily? A lottery means it's coming out of somebody's pocket. They just select to spend the money, but it's still coming out, and it's really not helping, I don't think, the bottom line of people who really probably shouldn't be investing their money in a lottery. So to me, it's kind of almost a gimmick. But if it brought some dollars in and helped from other places, that might be okay. But here's what I want to make. When it comes to education and what we really want in education, it costs. Everything in life is going up. The gas pump is going up, so everything costs. Even this program, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, there are people would suggest that this needs to be cut and we shouldn't fund this kind of a program. And the reason they have come to that conclusion is, well, we're having such tremendous budget problems now that we just simply can't afford some of these things. And that is the fundamental question. What do we want to pay for? What do we want to have? What do we value? What do we see as productive? What do we see as important to our community and to our quality of life? And that is the question that we have to decide on here. Each year we deal with these debates about budget shortfalls or overages and all of these kind of things, deficit appropriations. Each year we deal with that. Well, the only way I think we're going to ever be able to get beyond that is to really determine what it is that we value, what it is that we prioritize, and then put the money there to make sure that those things can be successful.
And I would hasten to point out that MPB is largely dependent as well on viewership and folks like you, viewers like you, who support Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We have another caller on the line, Stephen from the Delta. Stephen, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, if you implement a performance-based measure for the budget, what will happen to the smaller regional areas where maybe the affluent students will go to the larger 3 institutions, and then the smaller institutions will get the students who didn't perform well enough to get to the larger institutions, or maybe don't have the funding to make it to those institutions, and maybe they would be a lower quality student in that they didn't get quite the education that they needed. And how can you make sure that the regional institutions aren't impacted for their performance?
Sure, fair question. And you were nodding your head, Representative Buck.
Well, I think, and there needs to be some clarification on what performance-based measures mean. Performance-based measures means that each agency, or in this case IHL, each institution would say, all right, we're going to meet these set goals. We're going to graduate this many people in this many programs. We're going to be involved this much in terms of economic development and community outreach and service. And so in that regard, I think it's a very valid goal for us to go after. I mean, if each institution knows its role, knows its mission, then we should set goals for and track who's accomplishing those and where we need to improve. And so I don't see it so much as impacting the individual student, though only in that we want to make the institutions that they choose to attend the best they can possibly be.
All right, we just have about 3 minutes to go in the program, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. Just in general, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but the state of higher education and where we're headed. There's been some talk that this is, Representative Buck, I believe you alluded to the fact several times that this is hopefully a temporary situation where we are, the way the economy is. Where do we go from here? Where will we be in 10 years, say, Senator Hopson?
Well, who knows where we'll be in 10 years. I certainly hope our universities and community colleges will be better than they are today. Again, I think they're good now, but we can make them better. I don't really hear a lot of discussion about privatization. I've heard it mentioned, but I don't hear that there's no real movement to get universities to go that way. The only discussions that I think would change the face of Mississippi universities that has come up in my 4 years here is the possibility of consolidation of colleges, or at least programs, and combining programs in colleges. Whether or not you consolidate the universities themselves is one thing, but certainly universities and community colleges working together, and high schools, so that we've got a seamless education system in Mississippi. That's what I want to see happen in the next 10 years, so that K through 12 is communicating with community colleges, who are communicating with universities, and all the way through. I think that's going to make our whole system better, and in the long run, it's going to put out better and more productive students and citizens for us.
Senator Tollison?
Well, first off, I want to say, all things considered, we've weathered this recession pretty well. I mean, we certainly it helped with the federal stimulus dollars, but the tug of war we have about budgeting and things like that, it's worked out pretty well. We were concerned about this particular fiscal year because the federal stimulus money is cut off, and I think it's going to be all right. I mean, we're negotiating over $78 million. They're talking about $25 billion in Texas, and the same amount in California. And other states, you see what's going on in Wisconsin. So all things considered, we're pretty good. And Mississippi has a low cost of living. I mean, that is a fact. I mean, we're low property taxes. It's a good place to do business. And we need to continue to take advantage of our universities and what they have to offer. And I think we're starting to recognize that with research and development. And affordability, as I keep saying. And you have seen the enrollments of our universities go up. I mean, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Southern probably going to be about 25,000 or more in the next 10 years. I think Jackson State at 10,000 now will probably be close to 15,000. Those four research institutions are going to grow, and they're going to be part of the community and the economy. So I think that's a good outlook for the future.
All right, we'll leave it at that, because that is all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to thank all of our guests. We also thank you for joining our discussion tonight. We will soon have this edition of Quorum available for viewing online at mpbonline.org. Quorum returns next Wednesday at 7 with more coverage of the 2011 legislature. I'm Wilson Stribling. Good night.